All right, today we're going to look at the basics of your Tinkercad account. When you log in, you're going to see Create New Design. Go ahead and click that each time you start a new design. It's a lot like Google in that it automatically saves your work, just as if you're working in a Google Doc or something similar to that. It's going to automatically give it a name up here, and it's always something really random. So go ahead and click on that and give it a name of whatever project you're working on. For this, I'm going to call it Tinkercad 101. Okay, we're going to click off of that. If you don't give it a name of whatever project you're working on, it makes it really difficult for me to accurately grade you. So in order to make sure you get your credit, make sure you always name it. Now we're going to start at this top left. You're going to notice a box. You can click and drag that box to change your view of your work. Now remember, we're not creating in 2 dimensions anymore. Your work is not flat. It is 3 dimensions, which means we're going to have to use this a lot in order to be able to look around. If I end up in some wonky position, I can just hit this home button in order to get back to that neutral view. If I have zoomed way in, there's zoom in here. Of course, there's zoom out down here, but I can also hit fit all once I've got pieces on the board, and that will show me all of them. So I'm going to drag and drop some random pieces, and I'm just going to kind of place them all over the place. If I zoom way in on this one piece, and then I want to see them all, I can hit that button and it will zoom out enough to let me see everything again. I'm just going to highlight and delete those because I didn't actually need them yet. And I'm going to hit my home view because that's where I'm going to work from most of the time. Okay, now you've got your typical undo here, and we've got some grayed out options up here that we'll talk about in a few minutes. On our right side, we've got our work plane and our ruler. We're going to basically just stay on work plane. Down here you can actually edit your grid. Right now it's by millimeters, which we don't usually use millimeters, and so it's kind of a hard way to think about what size your design actually is. I'm going to go ahead and suggest that you hit Edit Grid. I need to get off of that. Edit Grid. And instead of the default, let's go to inches. So let's see what we talk about more. I'm going to go ahead and round that off to a normal 10 by 10 and hit Update Grid. So now my grid is 10 inches by 10 inches. I can come down to basic shapes, and I've got box, cylinder, sphere, lots of different options of basic shapes that I can manipulate to create my designs. You're going to use basic shapes, or there's a drop down menu. You can also use connectors, which is going to give you various ways to connect pieces together, and those are fine as well. What you are not going to use is, well, text and numbers I'm okay with in certain scenarios, so if that makes sense, I'm alright with that one. You're not going to use characters. They're fun. You can play around with them on your own. You're not going to use them for a project. You're not going to use hangout spaces. So when we create a house later on, you're not going to put already made furniture. If you want furniture in there, you're going to have to create your own. Again, you can play with these in your own designs, but if you're turning it into me, you can use basic shapes, text and numbers, and connectors. You're really going to use basic shapes most of that time. Once you pick your basic shapes, you can just drag and drop very simply. You can make them larger. Oh, I'm going to go hold of that square. I can make it larger. You can make it less smaller. If I want to make it taller, because remember this is 3D, so I'm going to look, now I've got, it's flat. I can use this center square to make it taller. You're not going to use this arrow to make it taller. This arrow actually raises it up off the work plane or sinks it down below the work plane. If it's below the work plane though, you've cut it off. Because think about this work plane as the bed of that 3D printer. And so this is where we start printing. Anything below it doesn't get printed, it gets cut off. So you want to make sure that your design is always sitting on top. You don't want it floating, because a 3D printer is not magic. It cannot print in the air. And you don't want it sunken below. You really want everything either sitting on top of that work plane or sitting on top of another object, which we'll talk about in the next video. You have some options here. You can make it solid or you can make it a hole, which will come in handy when you start building things. You may want certain objects to be hollow for several reasons. One, you want it to be useful. You want to be able to see, okay, if I make a house, well, people have to actually be able to go inside of that house, so I need to make it hollow. It also makes your designs a lot lighter and a lot easier to print quickly than if they're really dense and solid. There's no point in a lot of your designs being super dense and solid when we can put some holes and make them hollow. You also have some options to manipulate the length, width, and height here. If that works better for you, I'm fine with that. I don't personally use it very often. And the steps and the radius we'll look at in another video when we start talking about spheres. Now I'm going to go back and make this one solid. I can change the color if I'd like, so I'll change it to green. And I'm going to take a cylinder and drop a cylinder. I'm going to use that arrow that we just talked about to raise up, and I'm going to pull it over and set it down on top of my green block. When I click on that cylinder, it gives me these two options opened up. This one's going to delete it, so we don't want to delete it. But this one looks like several pieces of paper. It's going to duplicate. So let's say I'm designing a car and I finally get the wheel exactly how I want it. Well, I'm going to duplicate that 3 times. I'm not going to go through all the trouble of trying to make another car wheel exactly the same. So just hit duplicate and then drag and drop that second one wherever it is I would like it. I'm going to change my view real quick so that I can center these up. I'm really not creating anything specific right now. I'm just showing you how to use the different tools. Okay, let's say that I want all of this to stay together. I can do one of two things. I can do what I just did, which was I was held down the shift key and I clicked on each part. And you can see it says shapes, and in parentheses it says 3. Or I can click up above it and hold down and drag and drop to highlight them all. Then I get some more options. I get this option to group it. I'm going to group it, which means that it all becomes one piece to print. If I decide later on that I don't like it all grouped, all I have to do is hit the next button and ungroup it. So it's really easy. I can also flip it, which is just giving me the reverse image. These are the same, so that doesn't really tell you a whole lot. But if I had had some wonky shape and I wanted to flip it, it just would have turned it inside out. When I'm done, it is, like I said, a lot like Google. It is automatically going to save for you. So I don't have to worry about, what if I lose all my work before I come to class tomorrow, before I sign in and work on this later. All I have to do is hit this Tinkercad button, and it's going to take me back to that first screen that we started on. And you can see now where it has Tinkercad 101 and it's saved right here, and in just a second it's going to load me a preview. If I want to go back and work on it later, all I have to do is click Tinker this, and it's going to open it back up right where I ended off so that I continue to work. I'm going to hit that home button and get that nice view again. When you are finished, if you want to export it, which you shouldn't necessarily have a reason to, but if you would like to export it and save it onto your personal computer, you're welcome to do that. You just hit export and it will download the file. I use that in order to 3D print your files. So I can go into each class and see what you did, and I hit export, and then I can 3D print the files that you created, which we will be doing later on this school year. I believe that's all that you need to see for the basics. I want you to watch the next video, which is going to be really short, but it's going to show you how to go through several of the pre-created lessons on Tinkercad in order to start to really learn and get comfortable with all of these.